welcome to part two of this Hardman Talks discussion with David Roylance. David is a consultant, speaker, and author of Be Seen, Be Heard, and Get Paid What You're Worth. So, David works with financial professionals and organizations to strengthen their confidence. He helps them refine their messaging and position themselves more effectively in competitive markets. It's been a really interesting discussion so far. So, we're looking forward to sharing part two. Let's get into it. I suppose investors are, they are looking for this. They're looking for a credible management team, a management team that they can rely on. And if they can't deliver that for just a simple, well, I say simple, but sometimes not so simple to deliver a speech or results or whatever it may be, a presentation. But if they can't do that, then it puts that doubt, I guess, whether they can carry out those operations in the way they're saying they will. So
Yes, and the thing is, making a presentation on behalf of a firm is one of the quickest ways to get visibility in front of the kind of people who can make good quality decisions about your career. Because that's how you can show value that extends beyond the title that sits on the desk or the door. And if you do that well, oh my goodness. Right, I worked with about 20 years ago now. I worked with a lady who wanted to be the first woman on the board of the Royal Bank of Scotland, and she kept fainting whenever she presented. And they were embarrassed. She was embarrassed. They said, "Look, there's an award ceremony. Just give the woman the award. You don't have to speak." And she fainted, and then they came to me. She'd seen about 11 other coaches, all of whom had focused on what she was saying. And I worked out really quickly that every time that she thought about presenting, she went and stopped breathing. The reason she was fainting was she stopped breathing to the point that her own brain went, "No, I'm going to have to knock you out so that you start breathing again." So our focus over our 6-month period was the breathing, and using the breath as a methodology of stepping over the fears that she had around presenting, which she did really well. And then, she found she loved it to bits, and then started volunteering to do more. And she rang me shortly after we'd finished working together, saying, "Well, the day's here. They've been offered that place on the board." And she said, even though a lot of people have contributed towards that, none of it would have been possible if we hadn't done the work on the breath. So it's always about how you are breathing. And we're reading that. All of us are reading that, whether we know it or not, all the time.
And you train people how to breathe.
Yes. So what I didn't say in my demonstration of the circles of energy was the position of presence, which is the second circle. The second circle is when you're in balance. And when you're in balance, you breathe from the stomach and not the chest.
Yes. Yes, well, that's exactly like when you sing, you have to have support from your diaphragm.
Yes. And so the voice that comes out when you breathe into the stomach, you've got a huge range, and you have access to all of it when you're doing that. And you only have access to a maximum of a third of it if you're breathing from the chest. So your voice is always going to sound pinched. Your voice is always going to sound stressed. You might feel a little sort of jiggle note-wise in the voice. But all of this is setting off the unconscious minds of the people who you're presenting to. So that they want that breath to be nice and low and slow.
Yeah. But you can't just tell yourself to breathe normally. You can't, there's a whole lot of psychology behind it, isn't it? And the fear of standing in front of people, it's you can't just say, oh right, well, I know I need to breathe deeper, so let me just go and do that. So there's a lot of groundwork that you have to do behind the scenes.
You're right. The human being is the only animal in the world that holds unnecessary tension.
Wow. It makes sense, but yes, when you say it like that, it's
And so we hold unnecessary tension that's based on stuff that happened in the past or stuff that we fear will happen in the future, which means that we're not present to the present. So you're right that it takes more than an hour, shall we say, to be able to get people to do that. So at Speak to Shine, I have a team of coaches that include my Alexander technique teacher from when I was at Guildhall. She now teaches at RADA, but what I'll do, she has a lovely little garden flat in Hampstead, and a studio there. So I send my clients to her in Hampstead. And Alexander Technique is a system of tension release developed by an actor named Alexander in the 19th century. Um, Tension release, particularly tension associated with the spine that traps the breath. So once I've done a little work with the client initially, I'll be able to see where there are stops in the breath, where there's tension in the body, shoulders, spine, lower back, knees. Uh, there's different places that you can look for it, and then I'll send them to see Katya, my Alexander technique teacher, and what'll happen is she'll run them. We give our clients like an audio recording of me speaking through a series of releases through the entirety of the body that I then ask them, just lie down on the floor, a little book under your head, knees in the air, so the soles of your feet are on the floor, and then just take this recording, put it next to your ear, and then 5 minutes before you jump into bed, go through this, or do it first thing in the morning. Pardon me, first thing in the morning. And what will happen is the work will happen subconsciously. So a month and a half later, they'll be standing more tall. They'll be accessing notes in their voices that perhaps they haven't done.
wow. So it can improve range because I guess, yes, you've got physical space to do so, to reach those places. Yeah.
Yes, and the thing is, when you sort of mentioned psychological things as well. The thing is, physical is the best way to start that conversation because it changes the conversation that you have with yourself. When you're used to breathing low and breathing slow with a slower heart rate, the way that you move, the way that you gesture, the way that you walk changes. And so it's a completely different energy. It's also completely different internal conversation that you have with yourself. If you wake up at 3 in the morning, you often say things to yourself, if particularly if you're worried about, will I ever get this funding? Will this business will I keep the house? All the different things that most entrepreneurs wake up in the middle of the night thinking, and then realize actually I wouldn't allow anyone else to speak to me like that. So why do I allow myself to speak to me like that? And then what happens is you change the physical dynamic, you change the way you speak to yourself because you start seeing the world as it is rather than how you fear it might be.
Mm. I suppose the physical that fixes maybe 60-70% of it. And then I'd imagine there's the other 30-40% of it is also the traumas and the kind of fears that we have, things that have happened in childhood, standing up at school plays and speaking in English class and reading out loud, and to, when you're speaking in a meeting, in front of your board of directors. And then you have these ideas about who are the people in the audience and how are they perceiving me. So I would imagine though that what you're saying with the physicality of it, that solves a lot of the problem, a big chunk of it.
Solves a lot of the problems. Yeah, because the thing is, it's not a natural thing for a human being to demand a group of people stop everything they're doing and look like for an hour, say, right, everyone, stop everything you're doing, sit down in the audience, quiet. I'm going to speak to you for an hour. It's not a, it's not a natural thing for the majority of people. It's a skill, right? Because the thing is, it's a skill about leadership. When you step up and go, all right, I've got the solution, right? Like people in the cave days, you get someone who goes, right, I know where the buffalo are. Great. you know, you can lead us because you know where the buffalo are. But gosh, if you go, I know where the buffalo are, and everyone goes, Ray, and charges out the cave with you and goes to a place where the buffalo aren't, then what's going to happen is you would have been likely to be chucked out the cave, die in the cold, not have any food. So all of those sort of fears stem from that, because the greatest fear that human beings have is rejection. And right, so if you step up and say, I'm going to present on behalf of the company, or I'm going to present for my business, you're saying I am the leader. And so all of those risks of rejection come with it. What happens if you present to a group of funders and end up with no funding? Then what happens in your head when you go back, to your home or to your office? Oh, well, I'm this, I'm that, I'm no good. Is that's that's the loop, and that's the unconscious mind's loop that keeps us alive by stopping us from stepping out of our comfort zone. No, don't do that. It's a risk. Right? No, 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 don't do that. You don't know how to do that. It's a risk. Don't do it. Right? The unconscious mind, the hypothalamus, its job is to keep us alive. That's it. Right? It's got two statuses, alive or dead, and it doesn't care how you feel. So it'll stop you doing anything and everything that it designates as as a danger.
So, David, I'm being prompted. We have totally digressed. um, we need to wrap it up a little bit. So, um, last question. So, your the title, we've spoken about this. We've said very interesting, very attention grabbing, and you've ended it with get paid what you are worth. So, how do you know what you're worth? And we're talking about pricing power. How do we go for gold, so to speak? And how do we know we have reached that gold?
Excellent. Super. Right. So there are two different marketplaces that people can occupy, what I call commodity and what I call value. And in commodity, it's all about price. So you go, someone, this is what entrepreneurs often make a mistake when they go networking. Hi, I'm David, I'm a voice coach. Hi, I'm Alan, I'm an osteopath. Hi, I'm Shannon, I'm a lawyer. And the response to that is, so what? Right? So for instance, if you're Alan the osteopath and you go, hi, I'm Alan the osteopath, networking, the room will go either, I love osteopaths because I've already got one. Or they'll go, I hate osteopaths because I had an osteopath and they massively screwed my back. Or they'll go, I don't know what an osteopath is, but I'm not about to admit that in front of people. And right. So the thing is, I'm specifically choosing osteopath because I used to work with one who was based in a centre in London where there were 5 other osteopaths. One charged 75, one charged 80, one charged 85, one charged 70, another one charged 75 per hour. right? So someone coming in the door, how do you differentiate between those people? Well, if there's no other way of differentiation, I'll choose the cheapest. And so what happens, particularly if you're in a firm and you have a title within the firm, is if you sit as a commodity, people will not care whether you stay or go. You know, uh, remember I mentioned the RBS. I worked with the Treasury Department of the RBS. A client of mine was the financial director, and I'd helped him move from Standard Life. And I was working with the Treasury Department one morning, and it was the weirdest morning that I've ever had. And they just weren't present in the room, and I left the room. And on the way out the door, I got a call. We're terminating the contract, and I thought, oh my God, what have I done? And then it went silent for 3 months, and then I got called back in. We'd like you to work with the Treasury Department again. Now, this is about 2009, so it was the crash that was happening there. They just bought their toxic bank in Holland. And I sat down with my client after I got called back in. I said, how come it was you fired me and then rehired me? How come the 3-month wait? And they said, we didn't want to waste money having you train people we plan to get rid of. And he then said, we've culled, nice word, culled a third of the company. We've culled a third of the bank. And I said, how did you do that? He said, it's very simple. We looked for everyone with their heads down and we fired them.
Continue. What happened there?
Right. So what he meant was they made a presumption that if your head was down and you weren't seeking attention, that you weren't valuable. Now, I'm not saying that's right, and I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm saying it is.
But they were saying that they are not going to keep anybody who doesn't know their worth, who doesn't know, yeah, the attention that they are worth.
You have to be. It's like 90% of being successful is about taking what you're good at out into the world. Harvey J. Coleman was top sales director at IBM in the 80s, and he wrote a book about this because he never got promoted. And even though he kept asking to be promoted, and even though he kept breaking sales records, and so he left, set up his own consultancy, not dissimilar to the kind of consultancy I have, and he wrote a book about this. And he said success is 10% your competence in the role that you are delivering, 30% in the image that you bring to work of yourself, and 60% who you take that image and that work and share it with. Who are you exposing yourself to within the firm, outside the firm? So when I'm working with my clients, particularly in the banking industry, and the finance industry, I'm thinking first, how do we expose your value within the bank? And if the bank then doesn't see it, how do we expose it if outside the bank, so you get a better job where you are valued? And it's all about who gets to see not what you're delivering now, but what you could be delivering, the potential of value. Remember, it's 23 seconds, and it's all about how you look and sound, as much more about how you're showing up. So you look at who's next on above you in the organization. How did they behave? How did they dress? Right. I used to work with Barclays Wealth. They had 30 floors at in Canary Wharf, Churchill Place, I think it is, and I used to work on the 30th floors, and the rule was no tie, you don't get out the lift. That's simple, right? So in those days, there was a really clear pathway in terms of how you dress. Now, that may not be so if I were talking to someone who ran a digital agency, for instance, I wouldn't be recommending that they wear a tie. But I, I would still be recommending that they hold themselves in a specific way and have conversations with clarity and also being direct at the right points, because you're again you're if you turned up in a business suit and you're working for a digital agency in Shoreditch, the ethos would be wrong.
Yeah, wouldn't quite gel, would it?
So the value is perception based. I once went to a presentation that started with a thrusting young Australian man jumping on the stage and saying, "I'm here to give you massive value." And I sat in the audience and I thought to myself, what all people do when someone says that, I'll be the judge of that. So what you can't do is say, "I am valuable."
Before you've shown the value.
You've got to show people the potential of value.
David, we're going to have to wrap up on that juicy nugget of insightfulness. And truly, this is really, it's been an amazing conversation. We've completely ditched the script. But that just shows how amazing you are and how interesting your work is. So thank you so much for this. I think it's really evident now. Clear communication, it's not simply a soft skill, it's an increasingly a commercial differentiator, and everybody has to grasp that. So thanks again, David. So with that, I think we'll conclude. So thank you to our audience. Thank you for watching. If you found this conversation valuable, which I'm sure you did, please do like, comment, and subscribe to Hardman Talks. We look forward to bringing you many more discussions like this. And if you'd like to know more, please do head to our description. We've got all the relevant links and resources in that description below. So see you back here next time. Thanks.